If you are restless tonight, lie back for a moment and imagine a circle of stones under a very slow sky. Let your shoulders drop. Breathe once, twice. Outside, rain threads the gutter, and the kettle hums somewhere in the house like a distant, friendly clock. Picture a small village a little way from where the land opens out. Low hedges, a road that narrows into a lane, a few warm windows glowing like lanterns, and beyond them, on the wide plain, a ring of weathered stones that have watched the sky for longer than anyone remembers. That is where our stories begin. There is a hush here that is not empty. It is full of small sounds: rain on slate, the soft creak of a gate, a kettle sigh, the whisper of footsteps on damp grass. Fairy lights strung along a cottage eaves tinkle in the distance, and the plain breathes, a steady, slow thing. Some nights that breath carries tales. Old people lean on low fences and tilt their heads toward the stones, as if listening to a friend. They do not demand answers. They fold mystery into their pockets like warmed bread, comforting to be taken out and smelled when sleep will not come. If you like, dim your lights now and let the sound carry you. You can let go of looking for certainty. These are folk tales, soft as steam from a cup of tea, and we will treat them that way, as companions for the night, not claims to be proven. Think of them as lullabies told round a hearth, each one warming a corner of the mind. They say the stones keep their own reckoning of the sun. At first light, when the mist is still a silver shawl over the plain and the kettle's steam curls like a small cloud, the stones appear to wake. In the thin hour before the village truly stirs, before bakers' ovens have warmed and before the milkman's cart creaks, the stones seem less like rock and more like old, patient engines. They catch the first touch of the sun and hold it like a hand holding warmth. Some folk will tell you with a soft smile that if you stand close enough you can feel them breathe. Just a hair's breadth of warmth that travels through shoes and socks, through woolen skirts, through the soles of you, like the first mouthful of hot tea. There is a story told about a woman called Lily. She is the kind of keeper who warms things with her hands. She tends an oven that never complains, and she keeps a pot of milky tea simmering against the damp. Lily is small in the way that people who carry much love are small, compact, steady, and full of reasons to move slowly. She measures time by more than clocks. She sets loaves into the oven, and by the time the crust has reached a rusty brown and the kitchen smells of caramel and spice, she will say, "That's the sun fully up." People would laugh at the exactness of it, and yet there is truth in it. The stones, they say, have a way of marking the turning of the day. When the first thin ray slips through the gap between two monoliths, it is like a hand striking a bell in the morning. Some call it alignment. Some call it the stones counting the sun. Lily calls it her signal to crack the first eggs, to slice a piece of dough for the cat, to fold the day open. You can imagine Lily standing just beyond the threshold, the air in her hair cold and clean. She cups the mug in both hands and breathes the steam, and the warmth goes through her fingers to the bread she will shape. There is the texture of flour on her palms, the soft, yielding gyve of dough, and the memory of a stone's coolness from a night's visit, which is somehow pleasing against her skin. She sometimes walks down to the stones in the early light, with a wrapped crust tucked beneath her apron, and leaves it on a flat slab. Not as an offering, more as a neighborly gift, like leaving a spare candle on someone's windowsill during a power cut. The stones are thought to like the earth's small comforts. They keep what is left where it falls, and, in return, the villagers feel a steadying rhythm to the days. You can count it in small ways. A loaf baked when the ray slides through a gap. The kettle switched off when a shadow moves. The cat stretched in the sun on the windowsill. The world, large and unknowable, becomes manageable at the edges. They say, too, that the stones have a voice if you listen in the right weather. Not a voice like ours, no words, no speech, but a deep, low resonance, a hum that reaches into the bones. People compare it to the sound of an old engine, the gentle thrum in a hearth, or the distant strum of a harp. It is a sound that makes your chest feel broader and the air around you a little softer. Some nights, when the wind is very still and the plain holds its breath, the stones will chime in a way that sounds like counting. 1, 2, 3, an old, slow counting of days and seasons, and perhaps a way of telling the sun where to be. It is a comforting notion that even something as large as the sky is being given a little guidance by a ring of stones at ground level. There are other ways they tell the tale. Some whisper that the stones were placed by hands that knew the sky as well as any sailor. Others say animals once stood where the stones are now, and that people later named the animals into stone to keep them longer. The useful thing is not which of these is true. The useful thing is that these stories wrap round the plain like a shawl. They make it smaller and friendlier and easier to walk under. On mornings when the mind is busy, when insomnia has tied small knots around the chest, it is enough to picture the stones keeping count, steady as breath. As the sun climbs, the colors on the stones soften. Pale lichen, shadow, and the faint green where moss keeps a secret. It is a slice of day that tastes like the middle of a poem, the warm metal of a kettle, the hush of reading, the luxuriant, slow chew of a toasted slice. With such images, the mind might begin to slow, matching the cadence to the steady counting of the stones. Imagine, softly, counting drops as they fall from the eaves. 1, 2, 3. Let the rhythm of the rain join the stones' quiet counting, and let your own breath fall into that measure. On certain evenings, when fog rolls in, low and lit lanterns make little suns close to the earth, another story comes out, told under breath to children who press their faces to frosty panes. They say the moon is a musician, and that on blue-tinged, fog-drowned nights she sits on the edge of the world and plays the stones like harp strings. The moon has a cool, silver presence, not as warm as the sun, but with a watery, gentle light that smooths the edges of worry. When fog is thick, the moon seems to lean down and touch the plain. When she does, the stones respond. They run their finger along their own edges and give out notes like a harp. Quiet, hollow notes that float up and settle on the eyes. There is a tale, told in the low rooms where people knit late into the evening, about moonbeams that fall like threads. An old keeper called Rowan used to say that if you could tuck one of those threads into your pillowcase, you would have dreams that made sense of your fragments. He would say it with a wink and a modest growl, like a man who had spent many years learning how to make the world a gentler place. Rowan lived in the house beside the lane, and his hands smelled of mending and of the peat fire he kept wound low. On nights when the fog pooled like milk around hedgerows, Rowan would walk out to the stones with a lantern and a quiet, patient tread. He would sit on the low grass with his back against a slab and listen to the moon. Many said that he had a memory like a map, and that listening to the moon's harp helped him fold the map flat each night. You can hear the idea for yourself. The soft, wet hush of fog on leaves, the little snap of a twig underfoot, and then the stones answering in a tone that is cleaner than wind through a chimney. It is not music for a room that is bright. It is music for being alone with your thoughts and friendly with them again. Some who have listened to this moon music report a lightness in their chest, a loosening as if some unspoken knot has been unpicked. Others will say that after such listening, they find their dreams come with an order they had not expected. They dream of rivers that curve themselves into familiar shapes, of lost hats appearing under chairs, of old songs hummed by someone who appears only as a silhouette. It is all very gentle. Nothing sudden arrives from such music, no thunderbolt of revelation. Instead, there is an invitation to let things settle. Rowan, they say, would count the moonbeams as he sat. 1, 2, 3. Long numbers stretched like fingers. As he counted, the breath of the plain seemed to match him. When he grew old and his steps were slower, people would bring him a mug from Lily's kitchen. Tea that had been left on the back of the stove, warm as a little glowing thing. They would hand it to him, and he would close his hands over it like a child. Lily always knew when Rowan had been. She would set his cup on his table with a slice of the day's loaf and a small note. For listening. In that exchange is all that many of these stories aim for. A small physical kindness traded for an unburdening that cannot otherwise be bought. There is an old poem the villagers hum when the fog is thick. It goes in a low, simple rhythm that could be counted with the stones. I will not recite it exactly, for rhymes can tighten the throat, but imagine a line about the moon unspooling silver thread, and the stones plucking it into quiet loops. Imagine that line as a soft hand laid on your shoulder. In the autumn, when the trees change their coats and the air takes on the texture of cool cardigans, there is a sweeter tale to tell, one that involves the stars and children. The people close to the stones have a name for the sky at that time, the harvest sky, because it feels as if the stars are seeds hung in the dark, full of small things ready to be planted. They say that on clear, frosty nights, the stars fall like curious seeds, and that if you have a roof over your head and a kettle on your hob, you might find one in the corner of your garden by morning. These star seeds, so the story goes, are shy. They will not shine on command, and they are best with the gentlest encouragement. The baker, Lily, again, though she is more than a baker, she keeps ovens, stories, and people, has a way of collecting these seeds. One evening, after a day of damp that made the hedges boo, Lily stood with flour on her apron and looked out across the plain. The stars had been shy all week, hiding behind a smear of cloud, but that night they were bright as pinpricks. She made up a little tray of warm rolls, dusted with sugar and cinnamon, for the village children who liked to gather at her door. She told them a tale, that the stars planted dreams in bread, and if you ate a roll and wished gently, a small kind dream would take root. The children laughed and stuck their heads into their scarves and made wishes that sounded like giggling. Lily would tuck an extra roll into her shawl, and later, when the lane was quiet and the children were tucked in, she walked to the stones and sprinkled crumbs near a mossed joint. Some say the stones accepted them. Some say that by morning those crumbs had disappeared in a way that made sense only to the sky. It is an image that works like a balm. Crumb by crumb we leave our small hopes where they will be warmed by the vastness above. The villagers collect the little bright things of their nights in tiny ways, like leaving a spare umbrella by a neighbor's door, like passing a piece of cake along a fence, When you think of the stars as seeds, the idea that dreams might need a soil and a small tending hand is pleasingly ordinary. It reduces the large, glittering expanse to something one can coax, fold, and look after, such as you would with young plants in a window box. I will tell you more about the star children in a little while, but listen for a moment to the way the plain feels when the air is crisp. The soft crack of blown leaves, the kettle's tapered whistle, the way the stones take on a blue sheen that holds light like a bowl holds fruit. In that blue, the stars seem more intimate. They do not pit themselves against the night as a challenge. They sit like 1,000 small lamps strung overhead. You might count them if you like, letting the numbers slide through you like beads. 1, 2, 3. Counting settles the mind in the same way the stones settle the land. Not all of these stories end with clarity. There is a winter tale that people tell in the half-light between the 12th and the 13th of the year, when nights are long and the hearth has that particular tenor of orange embers that you can feel in your palms. It is a story about keeping vigil and about the small gifts that keep a community safe and warm. The stones, this tale suggests, stand as a kind of night keeper. They are patient in a way we can admire, but do not need to emulate at all hours. We, fragile and busy, make our way through the dark with blankets and soup and mince pies. The stones simply stay. That steadiness is a comfort no matter the reason for it. Once, in a winter much like this one, a keeper set out at dusk with an umbrella that rattled in the wind, a lantern with a clear, soft flame, and a parcel wrapped in brown paper. This keeper was named Etta, another of those who are small in their own steadiness, who lived in the low row of cottages and liked to see neighbors safe home. She wore a thick scarf and had taught herself to whistle a tune that made the hedgehogs curl. Etta's parcel contained a hot stew and a slice of pastry, and she was thinking only of the households she would pass. As she passed the stones, the wind altered, and her scarf tightened about her face. She felt, for a moment, as if the plane had drawn a deep breath and was holding it. She put the parcel down on a smooth surface, a kindness left for a cold traveler or a stray sheep, and when she did, a small sound came from the stones that was not unlike the sound of a kettle beginning to sing. Etta's heart softened. She wrapped the scarf tighter and hummed an old lullaby, the way you might hum to mend a small tear. She thought of the people in her lane, the young couple with the new baby, the widower who kept a radio on all night, the children who would leap puddles at morning. All of them were woven into a network of small acts. An umbrella lent, a kettle kept on, a door left unlatched for late hours. There is, in this story, no miraculous rescue, no sudden bright rebuke of the winter. Instead, the warmth comes from the repeated little gestures. In many folk tales, the cosmos is cold and indifferent. In these it is the opposite, or at least amenable to being folded into domestic care. The stone's vigil seems to make room for human acts of tenderness. Etta walks on, and the light from her lantern makes small, careful islands in the dark. Her footprints in the frost will be there in the morning, and someone will hollow them for a cat. You can imagine the plain as a long, shared blanket, with the stones stitched into the weave. These stories carry the same soft instruction. When the night stretches too long, answer it with the ordinary reliances of community. A slice of pie, an extra blanket, the kettle kept on at a friend's house. Such small things add up. They make the unknown less pressing by giving it a familiar pattern to rest against. The watchkeeper need not be heroic. They need only attend, hand to hand, as the world goes about its slow business. I want you to keep a detail in your mind now. An image as simple as a spoon. A low stone warmed by a morning sun ray, the curl of steam from tea, the hush of rain on a tin roof. Let that image be a kind of anchor. As the night turns and the sky draws its dark shawl across the plain, these small sensory points are the things that settle restless minds. Return to them when fuss and thought begin to crowd the edges of sleep. There are quiet, repetitive measurements woven through the folklore, things to count. Count the drops on the window. Count the stones that catch silver. Count the times you breathe in and out. Counting is not urgent here. It is a gentle activity, a little ritual to do with hands or eyes. Village children are taught to count the chimes of the stones like one counts beads. When you follow such a rhythm, your thoughts loosen. They do not so much fall away as tuck themselves into a soft pocket. And so we have, woven slowly, the beginning of a map. Sun counted by stone warmth. Moon's harp plucked in fog. Star seeds sown into bread. Winter vigils kept by ordinary kindness. Each tale is a little room leading to the larger house of mystery, and none tries to lock the door. They are doors opened for company. If you listen very quietly now, you might hear other small sounds. A distant dog calling once, faint and amiable. The soft rattle of rain growing steadier on the window pane. The kettle's note somewhere between a hum and a sigh. Imagine Lily in her kitchen, hands dusted with flour, turning a loaf as if turning a single cherished page. Imagine Rowan with his lantern, counting moonbeams like a man counting stitches. Imagine Etta's lantern making safe paths through frost. All of them are moving in ways that keep the dark at bay not by grand deeds, but by habit and presence. Before we go further, let me tell you a little about the stones as folks see them when the sky is crowded with northern lights, or when the Milky Way pours itself like sugar across the bowl of the heavens. On those nights, the plain looks almost like a room hung with fairy lights, and people will walk out with mugs, with rugs, with a small tin of warm porridge, and they will sit in clusters and point. They make shapes out of constellations the way they make shapes out of tea leaves, gentle, fanciful stories. One of the oldest of these tales concerns the sky drift, a slow current that carries small, bright things across the night. The sky drift is imagined as a sort of river of light above, and the stones, by some old reckoning, are thought to anchor the edges of that drift. When the sky drift moves very slowly, the stones give a faint, approving clatter that sounds like glad little bells. On nights like those, the villagers will sometimes string actual fairy lights through the low trees by the lane. They blend with the stars so neatly that for a moment your mind cannot tell which are which. Children will call them twin stars, and the sounds they make, soft, pleased little exclamations, are part of what carries the plain through the night. The sensory mix is comforting. The smell of wood smoke, the metallic tang of a lantern flame, the feeling of wool wrapped around shoulders, and the steady visual of a circle of aged stones reflecting a million years of weather. It is a domestic theater set beneath eternity. You can be part of that theater tonight simply by imagining it. There is patience embedded in all of these accounts. Nothing hurries, nothing insists. The stories endorse slowness as a virtue in a world that often prizes speed. For those who lie awake and find their minds racing, this is useful. To imagine a place where time is measured by loaf rising, by moonbeams gathered with a spoon, by children's slow wishes tucked into warm buns, is to offer the mind a different tempo, one that allows thought to unfurl gently rather than snap. I will tell one more legend before we pause. One told when the north wind is on, and the first snow has a hesitant idea of falling. This is the tale of a watch kept through a very long night. It is a winter story, and therefore careful with its comfort. It involves a keeper who is not called to heroics but to being present, and it speaks to a truth we sometimes forget. Presence is itself a kind of answer. They say that on the longest night, when the wind pushes ice like little knives along the road and the plain is all white, the stones gather so much cold that they hold it like a pocket. A keeper, someone who might be named for the work they do, walks out at dusk with a lantern. This keeper is often said to have a soft, rough kind of voice and hands that know where to put a blanket on a slumped shoulder. On this night, the keeper carries a tin of stew and an extra pair of mittens. The villagers are tucked in, and the keeper moves slowly from cottage to cottage, leaving the kettle on a low simmer in one house, a wrapped supper in another. The stones, quiet and muscular, stand sentinel. There is a small human drama within this. A child who cannot sleep because of a fever. A neighbor who fell while bringing in wood. A widow who wakes at odd hours and needs someone to pass by and nod. The keeper's rounds are unremarkable in the way the day is unremarkable, but they matter. The stones, so the tale says, seem to bow their heads. There is no miraculous mending, no sudden bursting of light and cure. But there is a thawing of worry, a small rearrangement of cares that makes the morning gentler. When we place such acts beside the enduring bulk of the stones, the result is soothing. We are reminded that the universe does not need one grand answer to make our nights bearable. A kettle left to simmer, a soft woolen glove passed through a window, a lamp kept burning. These are the interventions that comfort. The keeper returns to a cottage where a low fire has kept the hearth ember soft, and, as he lays his hands by the stove, he listens to the stones speak like the turning of pages. They feel, for a moment, companionable. You can see why the villagers prefer this to a tale of instant miracles. It is human-sized. It leaves room for the ordinary. And here, for now, we will pause our gentle wanderings. The plain is not a place for swift endings. The stones keep their own counsel, and we, who need rest and small consolations, will visit them again. For the time being, let the images sit. Lily's flower-smudged hands, Rowan's counted moonbeams, Etta's lantern, the little tray of star-dusted rolls, the keeper's circle of kindness. Let them fold up into the edge of your vision like soft fabric. Keep counting if it helps. Drops, stones, breaths. Let the kettle hum. Let the rain patter like a slow, steady footfall. Outside, the weather changes, and with it, the nature of the tales. Fog will thicken, or the stars will flush bright. Snow may fall and erase tracks, or the wind might bring the smell of the sea in through the lane. There are more stories to follow, about the way the stones might tilt their heads to the wind, about star children who choose a single dream and tuck it into a child's sleep, about a watcher who finds a little stranger at the edge of dawn. As the night deepens, you might find the urge to move, to go and stand at that ring of stone yourself. But there is also the invitation to stay where you are and let imagination do the walking. The plain is patient. The stones are patient. You are in the company of patience. Now, in the dark between the legends, there is a softer sound, the kettle's hiss, a crackle like embers shifting, the rain's even patter. Breathe with it. Keep your attention on such small, manageable things. They will carry you to the next tale when you are ready, and when you are not, they will simply keep you company. Now, in the dark between the legends, the plain keeps a kind of steady breathing. We will walk a little further along the low paths of story, not to pry, but to sit beside a window and watch the weather. There are small events that come on like soft sounds. A teacup set down, the sigh of a chair settling, the faint scuff of slippers on a flagged floor. Let those sounds be the frame for what follows. They say the star children are shy at first, and that is part of their charm. They do not tumble like meteors. They descend the way a thought settles, gradually and politely. In some tellings, the star children arrive just after dusk, when the light has thinned to a last blue, and the lane lamps are being coaxed awake. They are not people in the ordinary sense. Imagine instead a little cluster of brightness, like a moth outlined by a stray match, or a coin of light that has lost its pocket and is looking for somewhere to rest. When one of these small lights alights upon a garden, people whisper that a wish has been offered a place to grow. Lily liked to treat them like guests. After she had shut her shop and brushed the flour from her apron, she would tidy a little saucer on the sill, a saucer for crumbs and for moonlight, for any stray dust of the sky. If a child had been especially hopeful that day, she might warm a thin slice of spice cake and set it to cool by the window. The story goes that star children are fond of kindly smells: cinnamon, roasted apple, the faint tang of marmalade left to mature. It is not that they eat in the way we understand eating. Rather, they nestle where warmth and kindness are present. You might think of them as small pockets of attention. Children would creep to the window and watch the saucer, and in the morning sometimes a pale flake of sugar would have melted into the wood, as if some tender curiosity had passed. There is a quieter strand of that tale which speaks about the way star children choose a dream to keep. They do not choose at random. They look for a small longing, the kind that will not demand a life to fulfill it. Something like a wish for a safe letter to arrive, or for an old song to come back into a mind, or for a single afternoon without worry. A star child will hover, gauging whether that wish has the right soil, whether a neighbor is ready to tend it with a kindly act, whether a kettle will be kept on, whether a light will be left near a bedside. If those ordinary conditions are met, the star child will slip the dream into sleep like a seed into compost. Come morning, the dream will have sprouted a gentle comfort, a remembered word at just the right time, an apology made, a small repair finished. People speak of these things in hush because they are fragile, and because loudly named wishes sometimes lose their shape. There is a tale, soft as a sigh, of a child named Nell, who once lingered by Lily's door until late, clutching a thin scrap of paper with a scribble that was meant to be a picture. Nell had a shy manner. She would rather hide behind a scarf than speak straight out. That night she pressed the slip of paper into her hand and wished, with the kind of persevering hope only children have, that her father might come home from a town far away for her birthday. Lily, who had the sense to see what was needed and the habit of small kindness, wrapped a warm bun and told Nell to leave it in the garden under the plum tree after she had gone to bed. Nell did so, and then she tucked up under her blanket and fell into an uneven sleep that fluttered with worries. By the smallest of goods, by dint of a warm bun and a quiet life that made room, the story says a star child alighted on Nell's garden. It did not promise the father's return in a bright, sweeping way. Instead, it arranged for a letter to be delayed no longer by postman's mistake, for the father's bus to arrive earlier, for him to move with a rhythm that allowed a week's leave. The event was not miraculous. It was an accumulation of small, ordinary shifts that conspired in a pleasing order. When the father stepped back up the lane, carrying a parcel and smelling faintly of coal and a town's damp, Nell's wonder was not a thunderclap, but a gentle, wide smile. The star child had done what a star child does best. It picked a small, manageable hope and sat with it until it had a chance to root. These are kinds of comfort we can feed on. They teach us that the larger sky does not always need to perform great gestures. Sometimes it simply nudges the world so that the folding and the mending can happen. Think of the way a kettle hums on and leaves a house in a better temper. Think of the cloth warmed at a fire so that a hand can be eased into it. Such domestic actions are the soil where folklore's small miracles may take their time. Another story close to the stones takes place on nights when the wind decides to walk across the plain like a soft, busy creature. The stones, in some tellings, have an ear for wind and an inclination to tilt their own attitudes slightly toward it. They are said to listen and to speak back in the slow vocabulary of stone. A settling, a tiny grind, a sound like a bowed instrument when a breeze slips through just right. People used to go out on these nights with a thermos and a woolen rug, to sit and let the wind rearrange their thoughts. It is not so much that the wind tells them anything new. It is that the wind unknots old questions in the chest. On one of those nights, a small group from the village made their way to the edge of the plain. There were two lovers, quiet with one another's hands in their pockets, a lad who kept bees in a high glass shed, and a woman named Maeve who tended a small orchard behind her cottage. They sat on a blanket, and somebody had thought to bring ginger biscuits wrapped in wax paper. The sky moved overhead like a slow shawl. The stones, as if pleased, gave a soft, low sound. The young couple leaned together and recounted how they would plant an espalier row of apple trees. The beekeeper spoke of a new strain of honey he hoped to coax. Maeve, who had an impulse to correct everyone's grammar whenever she felt affectionate, suggested lovingly that they all try not to be quite so stern on themselves. The wind, in that moment, did what winds do best. It took the edges off. It scattered a knot of worry that had sat in the couple's chest, worries about work and about awkward conversations they had not yet had, and made a place for gentleness. The stone sounds, the ginger biscuits, the mild warmth of the thermos. These things together make a slow, sensible remedy. You may not think of it as a cure. It is better to think of it as an adjustment. The plain has room for such adjustments. Children learn this by watching adults, and soon enough the whole village understands that sometimes a windy night with company is a small rite of repair. There is an ocean weather tale, too, about the smell of the sea. The plain is not always far from the coast, and when a particular tide runs high, the air brings with it a salt that tastes faintly of iron and of remembered voyages. In such seasons, people say the stones stand differently, as if listening to a different language. Fishermen's wives might whisper that the stones remember the sea, that their weathered faces hold echoes of waves. It is one of those tales that neither needs proving nor rejecting. It is simply a shape people make to help the landscape feel continuous. One mild afternoon, a messenger boy, returning from a market town, paused near the stones because his bicycle tire had a small leak. He patched it with a pinch of conversation from a stranger and a piece of string from his own pocket. While he worked, two elderly women from the lane, one who kept bees and the other who had once walked the coastlines in her youth, sat on the nearest flat and talked of salt. Between them they fetched tea from a flask and a small tart from a paper bag. They spoke in that soft voice people use when they are allowing memory to pass. A mention of a ship's name, the taste of a hot roll after a winter haul, the particular hurt of waiting for those who go to sea. The messenger listened as if taking a small lesson, and later he would tell his own children of the way salt can be a comfort and a sorrow at once. These interludes are important because they show how the stones fit into life's daily choreography, not as a stage upon which the dramatic happens, but as a corner seat where neighbors sit and fold their day. The stones are patient listeners because they are allowed to be. They are reliable in the way that a kettle returns to whistle when water is boiled, reassuring rather than miraculous. There is, tucked into these stories, an image of the stones as a kind of ledger. Some say they note the comings and goings that matter, not in strict accounting, but in a gentle tally that keeps a record of tenderness. When someone leaves an extra loaf at a doorstep, when a child tips a saucer outside for a star child, when a lantern is left lit for an elder on a late winter night, the stones are said to take those small marks into their slow memory. They do not hold grudges. They do not demand payment. They tend rather to store warmth where it can be drawn upon later, like a larder. There is a tale, soft and oddly modern, of a visitor who arrived one autumn with a suitcase, a tired look, and a letter that would not fit under anyone's doormat. The visitor was ill with a kind of restless tiredness that had nothing to do with cold. He had come for the plain's quiet in the hope that sleep might find him by softer means. He rented a small room from Maeve, the orchard keeper, and on his first evening went out to the stones to sit and try to listen. He took his coat off and let it pool around him like a small, sagging boat. The stones made their usual low sound. He did not expect anything to change, but slowly, by degrees, and through the ordinary rituals the villagers offered, he found his breathing match the plain. Someone passing by, thinking he might be lonely, left a thermos by his feet and a napkin. Lily, who had been passing, put a crust in his pocket and said nothing at all. The next morning he woke with a sense that a small internal knot had loosened. He did not tell everyone that the stones had done it. He simply smiled more as he moved through the lane, and when he left a week later, he left a note of thanks folded into the curl of a leaf. There is a curious charm in these slow recoveries. We are not always healed in a blaze. Sometimes we are nudged. We are given a mug of tea, a hand at the gate, an umbrella loaned for a moment. The village is full of such offers, and the stones, being patient, hold these offers in their long memory. One of the gentlest of the legends bears on a tiny mystery often trotted out on winter evenings when children sit cross-legged and ask for one more story. It is the tale of the stranger at dawn. They say that sometime, under a sky still gray with the last breath of night, a small, delicate person was found sleeping with their head against the base of a monolith. They were not from the village. Perhaps they had wandered there on purpose, or perhaps the road had guided them, as roads do, when the villagers came out to make certain they were safe. Lily with a fresh loaf, Rowan with his lantern, Etta with a blanket. They discovered that the stranger had eyes like moss, and a voice that remembered several kinds of rain. They called themselves Astor. Astor did not allege to be anything other than someone passing through. They had a small sack with a few things wrapped in cloth, a notebook, a shard of sea glass, a pipe that had been used a little and then set aside. Aster smelled faintly of smoke and of long journeys. They said they had come to see what dreams looked like in a place where stones keep their own time. It is the sort of answer that sounds heady, but Aster's manner was plain and kind. They did not require anyone to be impressed. What made the encounter gentle was how the village received them. No one asked for papers. No one demanded an explanation. They offered tea. Lily made an extra mug and placed it in both hands, and the warmth seemed to gather Aster together for a moment. Etta took off her scarf and wrapped it around Aster's shoulders with the kind of decisive tenderness that meant, "We have decided you may stay if you want, and if you do not, you will not leave cold." Rowan, who had a way of filling silences with small stories, told Aster about an old oak that once sang to children. The beesman brought a jar of honey. These were not heroic gestures. They were the measures of a civilized life. Aster stayed longer than anyone first expected. They walked at dusk to the stones, which seemed to be their solace. In the mornings they would sit by the window at Lily's, scribbling in the notebook with quick, careful lines. Once they told a child that dreams were like small boats, and that sometimes they needed a harbor to rest before they sailed again. This metaphor pleased Lily because she liked images that could be used at breakfast. Over time it emerged that Aster's rest was not made by any one act, but by the slow accretion of small kindnesses. When they finally moved on, they left behind a pebble, a smooth, weathered stone etched with a shallow groove like a tiny river. And it was placed in the churchyard, because people like to keep things where they could see them. This is not a story of transformation by fame or miracle. It is a tale of gentleness earned in little measures. It suggests, quietly, that the world often responds to people who are treated as if they belong. The village's default manner, allowing space, bringing tea, becomes itself a healing force. Now, as the night deepens and the plain settles into the weight of its own darkness, there is one more kind of tale to hear. The story of the stones and the child's promise. It is told by the lamplight when the lane is a ribbon of orange, and the trees keep their own counsel in the yards. In this story, a child sits at the windowsill, cheeks flushed by the heat of the room, watching the sky for a falling star. She is small, young, perhaps 7, and she has decided, solemnly, that if a star falls, she will give up something of equal measure: her locket, her bread, her most treasured scribble. She chooses her small sacrifice with deliberation, because children know how to make bargains with the sky that are both earnest and pageant-like. On the night of her promise, the sky is generous. A thin trail of light breaks away. The child leaps up and runs into the garden, wrapping herself in her father's old coat. She holds a little paper parcel, an offering not of cost but of concern, and sets it beneath a broad stone. She whispers her wish, and then she waits in a way that children are practiced in. Patient, open, brave in a way that seems almost practiced by ritual. The story says that when she returns inside, she finds a note tucked under her pillow. The note reads, in a spidery hand, "Keep your promise to yourself. Keep sleeping." It gives no great counsel. It is a small thing, encouragement, which can carry one through the smallest of calamities. The moral of such tales is not that wishes must be bartered. Rather, it is that vows and small promises can steady the mind. In the act of promising, the child anchors herself. She engages in an old human economy where intention is counted, and small acts are performed with devotion. That is what many of these legends encourage: rituals that are manageable. When insomnia presses, The reply need not be a dramatic fix, a promise to oneself, a kettle on the hob, a candle left by the bed. These are the instruments we have. As dawn approaches in our stories, the stones seem to close their eyes like an old cat. The light changes so gradually that you scarcely notice the first color. In that hazy place between sleep and waking thought, another kind of folklore is sometimes told by those who rise early. The tale of the chime that plugs the sky. It is said that once, on a morning made of brass and honey, a shepherd's bell was lost in a flock and left behind under a flat slab. The bell was small, and it rang in a voice like a teacup tipped on a saucer. When the bell lay under the stone, something happened. The morning's light, when it touched the stone, came through in a rhythm that sounded like a small, happy counting. People who heard it said their footsteps felt lighter for the day. These little tales about recovered things stroke the imagination gently. They suggest that loss is not always a hole in the world. Sometimes loss is a place where someone else finds a tiny joy. The bell's tune becomes a thread in the plain's slow music. In the village, people say that keeping track of small things, keys, a knitting needle, a favorite mug, is not merely domestic housekeeping. It is a way of keeping the world friendly. The stones, guardians of little recoveries, bear witness without being stern. Our stories, as you might have noticed, keep returning to the same notion, that small acts and soft rhythms can reorder the interior life. There is no spectacle in these myths. There is instead a patient, day-by-day care. If you are awake and attentive, you might try their exercises yourself. A small ritual, repeated with a quiet mind, has the capacity to move the anxious heart. Make tea slowly. Count the drops off the eaves. 1, 2, 3. Tuck a folded note beneath your pillow that says, "Be kind to yourself," and mean it. That is the secret these legends pretend to have discovered. There is one final legend the villagers tell when the sky is clear and the Milky Way is spread like a smudge of sugar across a plate. It is called, simply, the lullaby of the stones. They do not sing like birds. Their music is deeper, like a low piano chord struck and allowed to breathe. The lullaby is not a song with verses. It is a practice. It begins with a telling of the weather. Rain, wind, frost, calm. It names small things aloud. An oven's door, a kettle's neck, a child's slipper by the bed. And in naming them, it lets the mind familiarize itself with the world. The stones, in the telling, are said to answer with a long, pleasant tone, and in that exchange the listener finds rest. Once, on such an evening, the whole village gathered at the edge of the plain with rugs and flasks and a few biscuits. They did not make a proclamation. They simply sat. Rowan hummed a note that had lived in his mouth for decades. Lily passed a plate of warmed scones. Etta read a small poem, one that might as well have been a recipe for sleep. The stones made their deep, approving sound. People closed their eyes. They breathed out the day and allowed the space between the in-breath and the out-breath to lengthen. It was not a miracle. It was ordinary generosity prolonged. When the gathering broke, the lanes felt softened. The houses had a hush that was companionable rather than empty. This is the climax we have been approaching. Acceptance. Not resignation, but a cozy, warm consent to the unknowable. To be in the presence of the stones is to be offered a model of patience. Their mystery does not exact a price. It invites us instead to sit and be usual, to do the small, brave things we can do for one another. The broken world requires many forms of repair, and a village's daily kindnesses are perhaps one of the strongest. As you listen, you might take a slow breath. Let it in. Let it out. Imagine the stones standing under a sky that moves through its methods: sunrise, moonlight, starseed, long night. See them as a circle that holds not answers, but a pattern, like a clock with hands that move at human pace. When your mind wants to know, let it find satisfaction in the small tasks: making tea, folding a blanket, leaving a light on for someone who might come late. Each act becomes a stitch in a wider cloth of peace. I will give you, to take into the quiet, a few small images to hold as anchors. Picture a stone warmed by the very first ray of sun. It glows briefly, then returns to its honest coolness, content to have done its job. Picture a moonbeam threaded like silver through a cottage window, pooling on a wooden floor. Picture a starseed wrapped in paper, tucked into a pocket, growing a small, kind dream over the weeks. Picture a lantern left on a windowsill, burning low to show that someone shares the night. Keep these images close like a handful of sugar lumps you can drop into your tea when the night tastes too bitter. You may find your eyes growing heavier. Let them. There is no hurry here. The plane will be there when you open them again. The stones will still keep their quiet company. If your thoughts come back with questions, as they sometimes do, return to the counting. Count the stones you can imagine in that circle. Count the breaths you take. Count the small things you have given and received. Counting, like a lullaby, keeps the mind gentle. Before we end, one soft suggestion. If you have enjoyed these quiet folk tales, and you would like more stories to carry you through other restless nights, consider following along for future legends. There are always more plainside tales to share, and more gentle rhythms to learn. If you choose not to, that is fine too. The stones do not mind. Now, in the last few moments, let me fold the plane into a single, soothing image. Imagine yourself wrapped in a favorite blanket, a low cup of tea at hand, and beyond the window the circle of stones standing as they always have. Above them, the sky moves with the steady, patient grace of a metronome. A star here, a moonwash there, the steady opening of morning. The stones make their soft, deep sound, a note that is ancient and yet, for tonight, intimately new. Breathe with it. Breathe in. Breathe out. Let the rhythm take the shape of your night. Let the mystery be a companion that steadies rather than unsettles. The plain keeps watch. The village tends its small fires. You are not alone in your wakefulness. There is a whole quiet world beyond the pain that knows how to make room for troubled minds. Rest when you are ready. Let the Stonehenge of our stories hold its patient counsel while you sleep. Good night.